This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So, Ian, we're probably going to, I think I'll wait until, 3:01 or something like that. We don't like to wait too long, but sometimes it takes people a minute, to get connected. And I'm probably going to, depending on how many people are on the line, I'll probably mute folks. And so it'll, be pretty quiet while you're presenting, but, maybe I'll chime in every now and then just to let you know that somebody's still there.
Thank you.
Okay. And this is being recorded. I hope that's that's okay with you, Ian, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, good. Okay. So, I guess while we're waiting another minute here, this is the week of AGU, so a lot of geophysicists, geoscience folks, there's 24,000 of us, I think, or something, here in Washington, D.C. area, including a lot of the Pangeo folks and, a lot of other folks who probably would like to be on this call, but that's the great thing about recording it.
Yep.
They can watch it later. And it's just for some people, and especially for things like this, I think it's just really nice to have to see somebody else do it. You can read the documentation, of course, but it's really helpful to see somebody do it. So I think we should go ahead and get started. Welcome folks to this ESIP Tech Dive webinar series. If you are not familiar with this series, it meets every month on the second Thursday at 3 p.m. And we have a list of all of our previous talks here. And you can see actually over the past year or so, we've really been hitting hard on this concept of Jupyter notebooks and reproducibility, scalability in the cloud with some of the Pangeo talks, standards, things like that. And so today, I asked Ian if he would talk about developing JupyterLab extensions, partly because we have in the Pangeo project taken advantage of some of those extensions in a pretty cool way. And actually, they were just used in this tutorial yesterday here to launch a cluster from an extension and then inject that into the notebooks that we were running. So it's super cool. Anyway, without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Ian. I'm going to make you the presenter here, and you should go ahead and be able to share your screen.
Great, thanks, Rich. Okay, is my screen showing up?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. The topic of what I'll be talking about today is developing JupyterLab extensions. If you haven't come across JupyterLab before, it's the new front end for the Jupyter Notebook server. It's a ground-up rewrite of the old classic notebook interface. I believe both Jason Grout and Brian Granger have given this seminar in the past and given a nice overview of what JupyterLab is all about. But what I'm going to be focusing today on is the idea of developing extensions to JupyterLab. One of the things we've put a lot of effort into is trying to make JupyterLab have well-designed APIs for developing extensions, and we're really trying to encourage people to write extensions that scratch their own itches. To that end, the entire application that you see here is itself a collection of JupyterLab extensions, and things that you write, extensions that you write, exist on equal footing to all the extensions that we write. So we're really trying to walk the walk in terms of our messaging about extensions. So my plan is to walk through a couple tutorials that we've set up for extension development. For people who are on the call who would like to ask questions during this, please do. Don't hesitate to jump in. If I miss you, maybe Rich can yell at me, and I can then try to answer questions as we go. But otherwise, I'll just sort of forward ahead.
Yep. Sounds good.
Before I start, I'm going to point out a couple extensions. So this is not the stock JupyterLab application. I have installed a couple extensions to start with. So there are two major kinds of extensions that we support. One is called the so-called standard extension, which does basically anything you want. You get access to the whole application, and you can muck about in its internals and do various things with the API. But then we also provide a simplified extension interface for people who have a particular type of data that they want to be able to render. So this is, we think, a pretty common use case where somebody says, "Oh, I've got some structured data of some type, and I want to write a renderer for it." And so that we call a RenderMime extension, and is a sort of simplified interface to just say, we give you a div on the screen, and then you render some data into it. So one example of a RenderMime extension is this Geo Json Extension, which was written at a sprint a couple years ago, and I think it has been a really nice example of the extensibility of the rendering system in JupyterLab. So before this, a few minutes ago, I downloaded some Geo Json data from USGS that show the perimeters of the Camp and Woolsey fires, which were two very damaging fires in California this year. And if I double click on this, these are just plain text JSON data, but when I double click on them, it defaults to opening them in a leaflet map that shows the perimeter of these fires in GeoJSON format. So here's the fire that burned through Malibu a month ago, and this is the fire that burned through Paradise near Chico, California, earlier this year. So this is an example of taking some structured data and writing a separate renderer for it. And if we we can open this same file with a text editor, and it's not very easy to read, but this is all that same data, but in text format.
And if you wanted to, did you have control over that thing? Like if you wanted to add like a word wrap, or maybe there already was a wrap in there, because like in the text editor that we were just looking at.
Yeah. So if it took a moment to open because it's a very large file, but so you can see it's only on 9 lines, and that's because it's got one very long line.
Right.
Let's see what happens. Let's see if I can turn on word wrap and see if it. Yep. So we do. So now it's, I guess, it's a little more legible.
Okay, I guess I was at. So if that wasn't there, is that the example of a kind of thing that someone could then add, like that word wrap, or is that maybe I'm not getting, this is a. Okay, it is.
Go ahead. Yeah. So there is the ability to customize the behavior of our various core extensions. So the text editor that we're looking at here is one of our core extensions, and extension authors can write an extension itself grabs the text editor functionality and does other stuff to it.
Okay, cool. That was my question. Yeah.
So the word wrap in particular, that's something that you can that's something that we provide settings for that already, so that maybe you wouldn't do that with an extension. But if you wanted to do something more complicated, you absolutely could get a handle on our text editor and mess around with it.
Got it. Thanks.
So that's an example of a render mime extension. There are a couple other extensions that I have installed here. One that Rich alluded to a few minutes ago is this new Dask extension that I've been working on. It allows you to spin up Dask clusters and then connect to, so I just clicked on new here, and then connect to that cluster, connect to the dashboard displays for that cluster, and then open them up in JupyterLab panes. So here's something that shows the memory usage of the cluster that I just started. But that's not what this presentation's about, so I'm going to shut that down and close this. And finally, I wanted to point out, this is the one that I'm fond of. This is a GitHub extension that goes out to GitHub and then allows you to explore files on GitHub using the JupyterLab interface. So I can go to the JupyterLab organization on GitHub and go to and navigate to the JupyterLab MP4 repository, which is one of the tutorials I'm about to do. So I'm going to open up tutorial.md using Markdown, a Markdown renderer, and here's a rendering of what I'm about to do. So because JupyterLab is a web application, if you want to write extensions for it, writing JavaScript is more or less inevitable. So I've created a new Conda environment here, the ESIP environment, and we're going to do our development in this environment. So the very first thing that I'm going to have to do is install Node, which is a JavaScript runtime and is used for managing dependencies and general application development when you're working with JavaScript. So
you want to show how to close, Ian, you want to show how to close like the left panel?
Sure. So that's just opening and collapsing the left panel there. So here I'm going to install the Node.js runtime, or actually install correctly, hopefully. So yeah, I'm installing Node.js into this environment, which will allow me to actually manage the JavaScript dependencies that we will need.
And what was the ESIP environment to start with?
This is essentially it's a bare Python 3 environment that I installed JupyterLab into.
Okay, so just JupyterLab?
Just JupyterLab.
Okay. And this works with 3.6 or 3.7 or?
I think this particular one is 3.6.
Okay. So Node.js, you could have, I guess it could have been installed. Well, it's better. Is it better to install it from Conda? I guess it's just simpler.
I usually do, but people can install it in any way they like, as long as it's a sufficiently recent version.
Yeah. And this is the reason this is slow is because Conda's solver is kind of slow, right? It's trying to figure out all the requirements right now.
Yeah. And had I known it would be maybe this slow to work out the environment, maybe I would have done this beforehand. But the goal was to do this, from start to finish.
Right. This is the part where we want to, that we close the oven door and then we just open the oven door later. Right.
As I vamped for a bit.
Yeah. I just should say though that we really gave the JupyterLab extensions there a really good run through yesterday. They got quite a workout because there were 40 people in the room, all using Binder with Dask on the back end, and everybody, 40 people created these clusters with like 20 workers in each cluster, and kept using their clusters over and over in the different notebooks by injecting
Nice.
that code into their notebooks. So it was pretty
Very cool.
Yeah, it was very cool, and everybody was also using the different Dask scheduler or Dask dashboard too.
Great.
So yeah.
Glad to hear that's getting some use. So one of the things we provide to sort of smooth the path for extension developers is a set of blank extensions, essentially empty extensions that get a lot of boilerplate out of the way and allow you to start from something that that correctly loads the extension into JupyterLab. And so in order to do that, we use a project called Cookie Cutter, which basically takes a template for a package and templates in things like your name and the name of the project and stuff like that. So that's what I'm installing here.
Now, why you're doing this? You installed one package and then you're installing the other instead of installing them both at the same time. There's no reason. Is there a reason for that, or is that just because that's the way the tutorial reads?
Mostly because I forgot to install Cookie Cutter before I in the line above. They could have been done together.
Yeah. Actually, in this, just a side note for people kind of installing, it's definitely better to install everything at once, because like on the same line instead of one by one, not only because it takes a while, but because the solver actually works better when it sees everything all at once. But I mean, it's not important in this case, but when you install like a whole ton of things, it actually works better, especially to do it all at the same time.
Complex compiled dependencies and such.
Yep. The solver's not perfect. Oh, somebody asked, what is Dask? Is that right? Did somebody ask what is Dask? Let's see.
So Dask is a Python library for doing distributed computations, and it endeavors to provide nice idiomatic interfaces to doing computations across cloud computing environments or HPC environments, or even just a local threaded environment.
Oh yeah. Actually, I guess the question was about the dashboard, but the dashboard is just a way to see what all the workers are doing. It shows you in real time what's going on, so you don't just sit there waiting. You can see exactly what's being done in a very appealing graphical way.
All right. So the tutorial that I'm going to do here is to create a video player that allows you to play audio and video in JupyterLab. So this is going to be an example of a MIME render extension. That's the thing that says, hey, I know how to render this thing into this node in your web page. And so the first step is going to be, copying and pasting this cookie cutter line, which says, hey, we're going to this template and downloading it and templating in various things. So my name is Ian. I'm going to skip the email field. The extension is going to be called JupyterLab MP4 because we're going to be playing MP4 files. The viewer name is going to be a human readable name for the viewer we're going to write. Okay, so here's the first sort of really important one, which is the MIME type that we're going to render. The way the renderers work is they're keyed by MIME type, which is a text string which indicates the format of the data that's coming in. So there's a MIME type for MP4 videos. It's video/MP4, and what this means is that when JupyterLab comes across some data which declares itself as video MP4, it will say, aha, I have an extension that's registered itself with me that knows how to do video MP4. So I'm gonna call that extension whenever I encounter data of this format.
So can I ask a question? So this cookie cutter, your cookie cutter is a general Python thing, and then you're pointing it toward a specific repo that contains some file that tells it what to put, how to populate these questions or something like that.
That's correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
there are some basically placeholders in this cookie cutter repository, which it's populating with the answers to these questions here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just we don't need to use cookie cutter, but this is it's
Right.
a way to get off the ground quickly.
And this is obviously specifically for these viewer extensions.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to give a name for this, which is MP4, a file extension, which is going to be .mp4. And then it's asking what the data format for this is going to be. And ultimately, the MP4 files are going to be encoded as strings. So we're going to say 1. And at this point, I've got a new directory in this directory called JupyterLab MP4. This is the extension that we just created. So there are a few files in this extension. One is the package.json. That is, if you're familiar with Python packaging, the package.json is kind of like the setup.py of JavaScript world. It describes the package and its dependencies. Got a mostly empty README. There's a tsconfig.json, which is configuration settings for TypeScript. JupyterLab is written in TypeScript, which is a compile to JavaScript language. It's basically JavaScript with type annotations. We recommend developing using TypeScript, although it's not required. And then we have a source and style directory. Style is where the CSS is going to be put, and source is where the actual source code is. So now we're going to try to actually, let's see if we can actually build and install this extension. So first, I'm going to write JLPM install. So what this does is JLPM is essentially a version of Yarn that we distribute with JupyterLab. Yarn is a JavaScript package manager. So JLPM install is going to install the dependencies for this project. Those dependencies are already declared in the package.json. So that installed a bunch of dependencies, and then I'm going to do JLPM run build. This builds our extension, but does not bundle it into JupyterLab. And then what I'm going to do is actually install this extension into JupyterLab. Now it doesn't do anything yet because we haven't actually written it, but I'm going to say JupyterLab extension install dot, which is going to install the extension in this current directory into JupyterLab, and this is gonna take a moment. So those specific incantations are going to be probably maybe some of the most opaque parts to new developers.
The JLPM is it sort of like NPM or something, but a higher level, or?
It is. We could just as easily be using NPM for those commands right now. We wound up deciding to distribute our own version of it to essentially try to cut down on incompatibilities.
Okay.
I would say it remains to be seen whether the confusion introduced by having another named thing was worth it. But yeah, if you are familiar with NPM, you can absolutely think of it as being the same thing.
So was the how did we know that we were ready to do this install? Was there some file that showed up or something, or well, anyway, go ahead.
I guess I don't understand. Is there?
Yeah. Well, what did you can you look at the history of your commands here for a second?
Yeah. So these three commands are sort of what it takes. This first thing installs the JavaScript dependencies. The second one, this is what actually takes our TypeScript and compiles it to JavaScript.
Yeah.
And then this third one, this takes our built extension and bundles it into the JupyterLab extension.
And that stuff got generated in some subdirectory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see there's now a lib directory. If I look at the contents of the source directory, I can actually do this using the file browser now. So if I look at the contents of the source directory, there's just a single file. It's index.ts. TS stands for Java TypeScript. If I go to the lib directory, there's now an index.js. This is the generated JavaScript from our TypeScript.
Okay.
So we will be editing the .ts files, which will then create .js files.
Okay.
So let's take a look at this .ts file. So this is the code for this RenderMime extension. There's first there are some imports. If you are familiar with Python, this should look reasonably familiar. Here is a place where the answers to our questions were populated in. We've got a MIME type. We've defined a MIME type for our extension. And then here we've got a class, which is the output widget, which implements a renderer interface. So this is the concept of a widget is essentially a div on the screen. It's basically a rectangle into which we're rendering some data. So what we're saying, what the RenderMime extension expects is a factory, that's this object here, which creates a widget, which is this object here, that knows how to render data of a particular type. And in this case, that data is MP4 data. So I'm going to start. Let's start authoring this MP4 renderer. So I'm going to start off by saying output widget is not a very descriptive name. So instead, we're going to call it a video widget.
And Ian, is this in your right panel here in the tutorial? Is this, if we scroll down, would we find sort of what you're doing here somewhere?
So yeah. All of this, people can follow along.
Okay.
And if it's all documented.
Yeah. Okay.
First I'm renaming this class video widget, and then to sort of reinforce that that process, I can then rebuild this. And if I haven't made a mistake, it should rebuild fine. And then I can rebuild the JupyterLab application by writing JupyterLab build. And this will take, as before, it'll take a minute. But okay, so so you can see with this extension, it's not that long. It's just under 80 lines of code, and there are three main components to it. There's this video widget, which is the thing that knows how to render, or that will know how to render the data. There's a renderer factory, which is responsible for creating new video widgets on demand. This is what gets called every time the application says, "Hey, I came across some video / MP4 data. I need to create a new renderer for it." And then there's this extension object. This is an object which describes this extension to the JupyterLab application. So it's saying we've got a unique ID. We're giving it a reference to our factory object, and then we're saying this this data was populated by the answers to our questions, and it's basically saying we know how to render MP4 data, and every time we come across a file which is .mp4, we should go to this renderer. Okay, so this is now built. So let's see what, and is actually built into the application that I'm running right now. So if I refresh the page, I should essentially get access to this extension. And so what we're going to try to do is download a video and try to open it. So when I was writing this tutorial, I was trying to look for videos that would be in the public domain, and decided on this little clip from a Buster Keaton movie. So if I try to open it, I get a load error for this video. That's because we haven't actually written the renderer yet. And in particular, this video is a binary file, and JupyterLab by default assumes that things that you open are plain text. So it tried to open a binary file as plain text and failed. So our next step is essentially going to be to let JupyterLab know that we should open this as a base64 encoded string. And so down here in this metadata that describes the extension, we're going to say, hey, the file format for this data is base64, which lets it know how to decode the data from the server. And then we're also going to let it know here to expect a base64 encoded string. For people who aren't familiar with base64, it's a way of encoding binary data into ASCII. I'm going to save it and rebuild the application again.
So this is how you deal with binary data in JavaScript?
This is a way. It's not the only way, but this is a way of encoding binary data into a string, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask earlier why it was only that your choices were string and JSON. It seemed a little confusing to.
Yeah, it's there. It's true that it seems like a short list, but you can encode a lot of stuff as a string.
Right. And this seems to be a common JavaScript thing. I mean, I don't really know anything about JavaScript, but you always get a lot of these warnings, right? Like, but they're okay.
Yeah. It'd be nice if we could figure out a way to, cut down on some of those or show less of them to the extension author. But
yeah.
But that's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I mean, some of them say things, like the platform Linux is incompatible with this module.
Yeah. We should probably figure out how to make that warning go away because it doesn't really matter. Okay,
Right.
I'm refreshing the page again. And we're going to try opening that file again. So here's keaton.mp4. And this time we did not get an error, but we did get some gobbledygook into this pane. What we're actually seeing here, this is the base64 encoded string that got sent over the wire. So now we actually have the data, and we're showing it in this panel, but it's not what we were looking for. We want a video, not a base64 encoded string. So the next step is going to be, now that we are loading the data correctly, the next step is going to be actually displaying it in the way that we want. And so here we're basically going. So here's where the magic happens. So we have this render model function, which this is the function which says, hey, I got some data, do something with it. What it's doing right now is it's grabbing that data, and you can see here this.node.textContent equals data.slice. This is basically taking the first 16,000 characters of the data and dumping it into that panel. So that's this is the thing that we want to replace with an actual video. So instead of dumping text in there, let's actually make an HTML video node. So what we're going to do here is, in the constructor for this video widget, we're going to say document.create element. This creates a new HTML DOM node, if you've come across those before. We're making a new video tag for this widget. And we're going to set some settings for this video element. And we're going to, this is going to set the controls for the video that will allow us to actually interact with it in a useful way. And then we're going to take this newly created element, and we're going to add it to this video widget. And I'm going to declare the video down here as type. And this is a TypeScriptism where we're actually saying we're declaring the type of this video element. And then
your append child statement has a typo. Videos.
Thank you.
So I catch that.
Live coding. Okay, and so then here is where we actually are going to take that data and render it into the video element. What I'm doing here is using a template literal for JavaScript strings. I'm templating in the MIME type and also the data. If you've used Python F strings, this is essentially the same idea. Okay. Hopefully that should be enough to get our video rendered in the into that node instead of just the base64 encoded text content. So first, we're going to rebuild it, and if I haven't made any more typos, this should go okay. And then rebundle the application.
Ian, how many other people have, how big is the community of JupyterLab extension builders, would you say?
So one of our developers, Vidar, wrote this nice new extension manager. So this actually allows you to search for and install extensions from the broader community. So you can see here, this is the list of extensions that I've currently installed. And then if we actually go down here, we've got, this is actually going to NPM and listing JupyterLab extensions that it finds based on a keyword.
Wow. Okay.
So you can see looks like there's at this point dozens, maybe 100.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that I often like to check. So one of our tutorials is the Xkcd extension, and I like to check and see how many people have done the Xkcd tutorial and published it. It looks like at the moment it's maybe about 15.
Yeah,
of what should be more or less identical extensions.
Right.
We should probably encourage people to not publish it anymore.
But it's kind of a handy metric too.
Yeah.
So is this taking? Oh, okay. Did that take a little longer? I don't know.
Maybe a little bit. But
yeah.
The rebundling is not that fast. It is basically taking all of your all of the JavaScript dependencies of all of the JupyterLab extensions and deduplicating them and sometimes minifying them and adding them all into a few very large JavaScript files. It's slow. Okay. So now hopefully if I open this MP4 file, it should show something more interesting. Okay. So now we got something showing, and we can actually, well, can I press play? So here's one of the problems with it is that it showed up, but the sizing is all wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so it's maybe not quite that useful yet. And so the next step we're going to have to do is get some of the styling of this video right. And so since it's a styling issue, we're going to go to the index.css. This is where we're actually going to put the style rules for this extension so that it'll show up a little better. You can see the index.css currently has no rules in it, and we're going to add some. So we already add a CSS class in the JavaScript for this extension. So now I'm going to add a rule for that CSS class. We're going to say the overflow for this is auto. This will have it more correctly handle the sizing of the video. And we're going to add a rule for video tags within our MIME renderer. And we're going to say, let the width of the video take up the 100% of its containing div. And then rebuild it. Did I make any typos there? No, seems okay.
Does this, do the editors give you some kind of, are they language aware?
The text editor that is currently in JupyterLab does not have any linting or anything like that in it. They're language aware to the extent that they give you some syntax highlighting.
Okay, yeah.
But they're not language aware yet in any way that will give you linting or type hinting or anything like that. We're working towards that. It is it's obviously an incredibly useful feature, and many people want it. So one of our sort of big ticket items we're working on is integrating language server protocol, which is what powers VS Code, if anybody's ever used that. And that would allow us to get static analysis for things like Python and JavaScript. But it's not working at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a common thing is somebody tries something and says it didn't work, and the problem is curly brace is missing or something.
Right.
So for the more general case of not just a MIME viewer, are there something in the tutorial about that, or how does that? If somebody wanted to build something more complicated, maybe you're going to get to that.
Oops. All right, so something has gone wrong. So here's the part where.
This is the most useful thing, right? How to debug it.
Yeah, we try to debug it when something's gone wrong. Remove this.
The JupyterLab GitHubs. Oh no, that's something else, right?
That's something else, yeah.
Yeah. So the warning you're looking at is each. No, that's just a warning.
Yeah, and that has been since fixed.
Okay.
That's odd.
So you changed the CS. All you did was change the CSS.
All I did was change the CSS, yeah. When in doubt, rebuild.
Is this one of? I mean, I kind of remember like in the few times where I've done this kind of thing, like rebuilding, like I remember like, oh, sometimes you have to do npm build twice or something, or is there some kind of ordering of things that sometimes? I mean, why would you just build again? Like, why would that ever work?
Good question. I'm not sure I expect it to work. But sometimes you can get weird cached things that will fix if you reinstall your dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I suppose I don't really expect that to work. Nope.
So, I mean, so the tools that you have to work with to try to figure out what's going on here are basically your developer tools.
That's correct. They're the JavaScript developer tools in the browser.
So maybe you could kind of, if you can, I know this might be hard, but sort of say out loud what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
So what I'm thinking, is I'm a little confused right now, but so I made a CSS only change, but it appears that oh, there we go. I wonder what that's bizarre.
I mean, is this? It seems like this was some kind of caching problem or something, right? Or
maybe it was. So if I refresh the page. Nope. Okay, so I was messing around with the CSS rules here. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting this element and seeing what the rules for it are. If anybody sees anything, this is where we have a quiz to the viewers.
yeah, right.
Oh, I intended to have this rule target that, as per actually shown in there. Okay, I think that's the problem.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna go back. So what I had missed was the intention was for this CSS rule to apply to video tags inside of divs with this class name, and say, hey, for video tags inside the div, give it a width of 100%. But I made a mistake and forgot to actually add the video tag here. And so I was applying that width property to not the thing that I intended to.
But there was no real error, I guess. It just,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's why it was hard to find.
Right. There wasn't.
It's easier when. Right.
It was a mistake in authoring the CSS.
Right. Right. It's easier when there's an error, I guess.
Yeah, certainly can. Syntax errors are certainly easier to fix often.
Yeah. So it's still okay. So what was the thing that it was the build is the thing that takes 25 to 30 seconds or something?
That's right. And it is possible to run it incrementally, but I'm not doing that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've rebuilt.
It's going to work.
I wonder if this is a Chrome issue. I'm usually a Firefox user, but I'm using Chrome right now.
It shouldn't. How would that be? That couldn't be a Chrome issue, could it? I mean, it's.
Well, it may
It was
be that when I
displaying.
wrote this tutorial, I made a browser compatibility mistake. That would seem odd, wouldn't it, though?
Well, I mean, it was displaying though, so
Yeah.
I think maybe the when you had the when you looked at the tutorial, was it exactly the same here? Yeah. We just look at that one more time because the only thing you changed again was the CSS, right?
That's right.
Well,
So it does appear to be a browser compatibility issue.
really?
Yeah, so if I'm going to attempt to, okay, do you see that at all?
Yeah.
I just opened this in Firefox and
Huh. Interesting. Well, I guess that's a yeah.
anyways, this was the intention, was to show this fun Buster Keaton video.
Right. So now, why would that? Yeah. So how would that be a browser compatibility issue? Or like why would that? I mean, what? This seems
So
pretty
what we're doing there is taking the string data and dumping it into a video tag. It's possible that Chrome was unhappy with the size of that data.
Oh, okay.
You know, if we were doing something, if we were trying to do something more robust, we would actually point it at a URL so it could do fancy things like load parts of it rather than take the entire string data. If that makes sense.
Okay.
So
I kind of get
that's
it.
a guess.
Yeah. All right.
But that's unfortunate. I need to track down what's the. It may also just be a Chrome on Linux thing.
Well, I mean, that's okay. You know, we learned
Okay.
something, and you learned something.
That's true. Yeah. So
All right.
sometimes extension development is a little fraught, but
Yeah. So that's
hopefully
okay. I
at
mean,
least
but I think that was a good. I think that's a good sort of that was a good overview of some of the issues that I mean, clearly,
Sure.
yeah, the people who are some general scientist is probably not going to do this, but maybe some of the more techie folks could, or
Right.
maybe you get, or
Hopefully,
maybe you, yeah.
we would love it if some scientists, are able to scratch their itches and make extensions that view various data types.
Right.
But yeah, it's not necessarily for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that right there was the tutorial we have set up for the MIME renderer extensions. There are
Yep.
also, I'm going to open up the JupyterLab reference here. We also have a tutorial for an Xkcd extension, which if you go to our Read the Docs page, it's linked there. And this is a tutorial that opens up a random Xkcd comic in a panel, and that is a standard extension, which means it has access to more of the application than the RenderMime extension does. And
interesting.
does
Okay.
things like adds a command to the command palette. You can and does some logic around layout restoration and updating the panel. So this is something to step through. I don't think we have time today.
Yeah.
But for people who want to do a tutorial for a more the more general purpose extensions that have more capabilities than the RenderMime extensions.
Okay. Well, yeah, we're in our last minute here, so I just want to thank you again, Ian, for taking time to go through this. I think it's actually, even though there was some stumbles, it's actually kind of interesting to see that it's in a way it's more interesting than when everything just works perfectly.
Sure.
So
Sure.
and then okay, so folks, next month we're going to actually have Scott Henderson talking about working with Landsat data in the Pangea platform. So you'll probably get a chance to see some of those JupyterLab widgets in play there. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Ian, and everyone for showing up, and we'll see you next month. And
Thanks
the recording will probably come out tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. See you later. Oh. Did you want to say something, Ian?
I was going to say I'm happy to take questions if anybody has questions after the recording, but if not.
Oh, okay. Let me see here.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
All right. Does anybody want to ask a question? Who's left? You might have to unmute yourself.
Hey, this is Leslie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was Googling around while you were giving your presentation, and I guess you showed how you can see a list of extensions within JupyterLab, but outside of it, is it true that the best place to go is on GitHub and sort of look at the JupyterLab -extension topic? Is that the best place to go?
Yeah, I would say that, and also the same tag can also be searched on NPM.
Okay. And do you know, are there any that are specific to like earth science or something from geoscience that you've seen?
So the Geo Json Extension that I showed, has a has a geoinformatics spin to it. There's also I believe that somebody has put some work into an iRods server or an iRods browser, but I don't know much about it. Let's see. The Dask extension that I demoed briefly, is more general purpose than earth science, but was done in collaboration with some with the Pangeo team.
Cool, thank you.
Karen, are you still on the line? I guess you had a.
I do, actually, I am. And I'm trying to figure, I have to learn about Jupyter. It's part of my new job. I know what it stands for, and that's about as far as I've gotten. And I have the account, and I was wondering, what would be your suggestions for somebody kind of starting out for it? I mean, I've been taking notes, actually, and like check out GitHub, and but any other advice?
Are you looking to use it as a user or as a
Both
as a
a researcher and a librarian.
So I would say that, I mean, the things to do would be install it, look for some example notebooks or things that that are of interest to you. We have a very wide user base, so odds are there are some notebooks that are published or have been shared in your field and like have some personal interest. I'm a believer in the things that scratch your own itches are the best way to learn something.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so actually one tip, Karen, if you're interested in looking at notebooks that might be, of interest to whatever kind of community or thing, you can actually search on in Google. You can do ext:/IPYNB and find notebooks that, if you add some, like, you could add some words, some to your Google search to say, like, if you're interested in I don't know, wavelet transforms or something, you could type in wavelet and an ext:/IPYNB and probably come up with some notebooks that do something with wavelets.
Can you
so it's
repeat
kind of
that a little bit? That I think I got EXTIBM.
ext in Google. If you type ext:, you can search for files that have a particular extension. So ext for extension, ext:, and then you can do IPYNB, which is what the notebooks end in. And so you can basically search the web for notebooks.
Oh, that's great. And yes, because we've been doing this, and we actually have been doing it for health-related things. And we actually did a whole training, and that's where I found out about the name about it. I'm like, It's Julia Python electronic resource. But it didn't make any sense to me at the time, so I'm still trying to figure this out.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you so much for your help. I appreciate it.
This is probably a rough place to start out your introduction to Jupyter. But thanks for hanging in there.
Well, I have the account already, and we were working on it with the NIH, and so I actually understand a little bit of what you're doing.
Yeah,
it's just it hasn't all gelled together yet.
Right.
So that's why I'm so happy you did this. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, bye-bye. I think that's probably a wrap. Yeah, I look forward to actually exploring some of those JupyterLab extensions. I didn't know all those existed. So, all right. Thanks again, Ian. Talk to you later.
Rich.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.